excited, obviously, to kick this off. Many, many years, I've always kicked this off with an explanation of kind of how our parents kind of get at this time of year. And I finally found the right prop that kind of explained it. Kind of looks like, you know, but the good news is that hopefully after tomorrow, everyone is going to leave with a much better understanding of kind of what the next 12 months, 16 months might look like. Tonight, our goal really is, this is an agenda that we've kind of tweaked over the years, and tonight what we're trying to accomplish is give you all kind of a general, I guess, overview or kind of a philosophical kind of look at the college process from three absolute experts. And I'm going to get into kind of our panel in a minute. But it's really kind of just a message of kind of some of the pitfalls that we as parents might want to avoid, some of the misconceptions that maybe we all have or our sons have about the college process, and also some of the things that we can do as parents to kind of support our sons and support our boys as they kind of go on to embark on this journey of self-discovery and kind of, you know, figure out what's a great fit for them in this process. So, you know, tonight hopefully you'll leave here with some really solid pieces of information that I think will help as a foundation as we start to build tomorrow with more than nuts and bolts type stuff. Before I go any further, I do want to make sure I introduce, and I'll do this again tomorrow because we probably have about half the parents here, but I want to introduce the office. I think, you know, everyone's probably pretty familiar with the people, but I'll do it anyway. Chris Phelps is now in his third year with us. Emily Debbie is now in her 6th year with us. John Gottsagen, who is with the ski team on the mountain. They're excited to have some snow. He is in his 3rd year in the college office. Mrs. Gomez, the glue that binds us all together, met everybody out in front, which you get your packet from. She's been with me for in the office now for 12 years, which is we're lucky to have her. You know, this is truly an office that you know, it's interesting, and I know everyone tonight got their counselor, but just so everyone's aware, we all collaborate on every single one of our boys, and you know, we have big roundtable discussions about trying to find a fit in colleges, and it's really a group that I'm very fortunate to work with, but also I'm really proud to say works extremely hard for your sons. I do want to introduce our special guest tonight, and you know, when we started talking about this particular group, we called it the Dream Team. And from my first days at Salisbury, you know, the 3 women to my right have been instrumental in helping me kind of figure out the landscapes, and I have learned as much from these 3 colleagues as I have from anybody in the business. And starting on the far right is Becky Munster. She's works at Dartmouth College. She's the Senior Associate Director at Dartmouth, and we are thrilled to have her. In the middle is Terry Cowdrey. She is the Vice President and Dean of Admissions at Colby College. And to my immediate right is Jessica Sullivan, who is the Associate Director of Admissions at St. Lawrence. And we'll do even more of an introduction tomorrow. But there is such a wealth of knowledge. The colleges represented here are not only Dartmouth, Colby, St. Lawrence, but it's, you know, everything from University of New Hampshire, Wesleyan, Vanderbilt, all different schools that our panels had experience at. So without further ado, thank you guys for being here. So what I've tasked, or we've tasked this panel to do is kind of take a concept that as a college office and in discussion, our first conference call we had back early in January in preparation for this, we had kind of a brainstorming session about what are things that our parents might really benefit from taking away. And we came up with 3 topics. One is common misconceptions students have about the college process. 2, top ways parents may support their sons through the college admissions process. And then the last one are called kind of parent traps. Some parent traps that are out there, and some things maybe as a group we could try to avoid as we go through here. We've kind of back and forth, trying to figure out how best to approach this. And so what each rep has done is kind of taken one of those themes and kind of prepared 15 minutes or so to kind of open it up and just talk a little bit about those bullet points. Tonight, tomorrow is going to be we're going to save a lot of time for questions. Tonight we'll have a minute or 2 or time for a few questions at the end, but we're trying to kind of hit with more themes tonight. Tomorrow is really about the nuts and bolts, and that's why we have the boys coming in. Everything from the application to the tour to the essay to interviews to visits to you name it. So tonight is again we're trying to hit on those major themes, and we're going to start with Miss Jessica Sullivan. And what we've asked Jessica to do is kind of talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions maybe some of the students have that are out there about the college process. So,
absolutely. Can everybody hear me if I don't use the microphone? Good? All right. If you can't, just raise your hand and let me know. And I'll pull out my past cheerleader voice for you and see what I can do. As Bobby said, I work at St. Lawrence University. I worked there since I graduated in 2000, so it's been my one and only home for the last 12 years, and I've been reading applications from Salisbury specifically for about 10 years now. So I'm very familiar with your school and try to really think of some of the misconceptions as they apply to your sons specifically. Those of you who have daughters realize sometimes the process is a little bit different between sons and daughters. So hopefully we'll capture a little bit of that in our conversation and throughout tomorrow as well. So the first misconception that I have listed is the one I call, if I don't mention it, maybe they won't notice. And it happens. We notice a lot. And so kind of glossing over perhaps something that might not be a perfect part of the application, whether that is related to grades or if there's a disciplinary violation or whatever it might be, it is honestly best for your son to face up to it and say it. And that's really something I recommend every time I meet with a student. If you're in an interview with me and I ask, how do you feel about your grades over the last few years? And they say, oh, I feel fine, I think I've done well. And then I get a transcript and I go, this is well. Like, this is well. I actually would love it if a student would look at me and say, this is what happened to me in my sophomore year. And maybe it wasn't that, maybe they weren't focused, maybe there's a really good reason for it, whatever it is, I think facing it is kind of the best policy in that. I always say don't leave us to assume, because we are all human and we tend to go, oh, well, they just didn't work hard in that class, and that may not be the case. The other misconception, and I think they hear it a lot from a lot of different sources, is that a clear top choice college will emerge. And eventually, maybe, yes, I think it's a little too soon to think it may just based on your summer and fall visits to schools. Sometimes students really struggle between a couple of different schools that are alike. So I'd say, not to force that, well, which gut reaction did you get? Which one did you like the most? Because there may be multiple places that they say, oh, I kind of like it there, I can see myself there. So I always say, just make them feel a little bit more comfortable if their friends are saying, I know where I want to go, and they're not sure yet. that gives them a different sense of feel, and maybe at that point, that college will come out. But I think end of the summer, when they're burnt out from visiting colleges, maybe there isn't one standing out. I think that's okay. The other misconception, my friend is there and he likes it, so it must be a good match for me. I think this happens a lot, especially you have a school like Salisbury where the boys get to know each other so well, and they may get along well, and they may have some similar things they like, but that does not necessarily mean that this thing college is the best fit for them. I encourage students to visit their friends, to stay overnight with their friends, to get that experience, but to kind of step back outside of that, because there might be some things that they like that their friend doesn't like. And so the assumption that just because you like a person means a place is good for you can be a little bit dangerous, because then you're following a path that may not be the best one. And then the other misconception is that a student should promote the one thing they're really, really good at every opportunity they can throughout their application. And I say that because there are multiple times a student has in the application to tell us something about themselves. In this case, there's a short answer, there's application supplements, there's the essay, there's the interview. If I read one of those, and I'm just coming from reading lots of applications yesterday, so definitely have lots of examples where students have done this, it's really hard when someone says, my favorite activity has been, let's go with a sport, go with football. With football, and they say, it's been a growing experience for me. And then you get the, what have you done in your summers, and they've gone to football camps. And then the essay is about the game that their team won for championships. And that doesn't tell us a ton about a student. It's good to use that example like once in one of those pieces, but not all of those pieces. There's something more to your son than that, even if that is their passion. And the risk in over-promoting that side of things is, what if that student ends up not being a recruit? And I'll talk about that as a misconception. I get to the end of the file and I say, well, they're not going to play football at St. Lawrence University. What are they going to do? And so they need to see a little bit more examples of some other things, whether it be community service, or they're on student government or something else, because then I can say, I can see this person. We envision people when we read applications. We do, even if we haven't met them. So I can say, I can really see him in the alley, or whatever it might be. And that's helpful because that plays to the students' naturally university. The other misconception is my strong junior year will compensate for my weaker 9th and 10th grade years. It's not to say your son has weaker 9th and 10th grade years, but it does happen once in a while. I think that the junior year is definitely a great time to maybe step it up if it hasn't happened yet. But they're in the middle of it right now. So there's when we look at this transcript, 1 year of a stronger record does not compensate usually for 2 years of that record. There needs to be a little bit, a little longer time in that for us to say, okay, I think the student really has turned it around and they've shown this consistently. So we do really look strongly at the end of the junior year, but this goes into my next misconception, which is senior year is a time to relax in the classroom. And that plays along with, once I'm admitted to a school, I can cut back on the classwork and my schedule. We look at them all. I have literally pulled decisions, looked at decisions and reevaluated applications based on a new set of grades. And it could be 2 days before a letter is mailed. It could be whatever it might be. I look at every single grade that comes in. So if I see a student who I've said, oh, they've done well, they've positive trend, great, and then I get the senior grades and I go, what is happening? That's a risk. That's a risk for us, and obviously not a great thing for a student. So, and I may at that point in time say, I'm going to ask the student about it, or I may not. It really depends on what the rest of the application holds. So I always say the senior year is not the time to sit back and relax, even after admission. Because all of us, I'm sure it's true for everyone else here, we put something in our letter that gives us the ability to withdraw that offer of admission if the grades do not plays, back to the athletics side, if the coach knows about me, the admissions office knows about me too, and vice versa. Not always the case. Every office does things differently, every campus is different, and their relationships with their athletics department, whether that's Division I, Division II, III, whatever it might be. That's not necessarily, if a coach has been talking to a student, I don't necessarily know that that student's been talking to that coach. I'm still reading the application, whether they're working with the coach or not. So it's very important to establish relationship with both offices. And I think it goes along with try not to, for your sons especially, to try not to think of themselves as a higher level recruit than what they are. They really need to ask the right questions. So I think it's really shocking in the end sometimes if they're saying, well, of course I'm playing in college, and that doesn't turn out to be, that's a devastating thing. So I think asking the right questions of coaches is very important in the process for recruited athletes. It's a tricky process, and you will learn that, or you are learning that at this point in time. And I think knowing what side the admissions falls on and what side the athletics falls on is a very important piece. And that also goes with athletics will get me in. I hear it all the time. I still hear it. I hear it every time I visit schools. I'm going to play sports, so that's why I'm going there. And that is when we throw in, maybe, well, what if you break your leg? You still want to love the place where you are. And so not all places take athletics into consideration when they're offering admission. There's flexibility in some places and not in others. So again, it's very important to not misconceive exactly what level your son might be at in the process. The final one I just want to say is it's my counselor's job to get me into college. We're colleagues. I come here every year. I'm going to do this for you. A lot of students think that this is the case. I mean, these are the people who are submitting the materials, but they can submit the materials. They write their recommendations. They're usually quite lovely from here, I must say. They have the conversations with us, but they're not there when your student is interviewing. They're not there when your son is on tour. They're not in every conversation. So it's impossible almost to predict sometimes what conversations are had outside of what's being had with a college counselor. Certainly it helps that they're at a school like Salisbury where everyone here knows their students so well. That's a huge benefit. But a lot of that, they can't make up grades, new grades for students, or a bad interaction, or whatever might happen. That's really on the son's shoulders. So that's why.
Good job, good job. Thanks, Jessica.
Yes.
So, Terry, we've tasked Terry with one of the more difficult ones, I think. And it's kind of the parent traps. And I think as this process gets more and more complicated, I think there are more traps out there. And so, Terry, if you wouldn't mind.
Don't mind at all. I've often said that perhaps one of the reasons my husband and I have only ever had dogs is because we don't have to send them to college. So I say that with great sympathy to all of you who are parents in this process, but also with the intention tonight and with our time together tomorrow to really help you feel more knowledgeable for sure, but also perhaps a little bit more relaxed about this process. I'm a big believer that information is power, and so that the more information that you have when you're going through any kind of process, and certainly one that some people perceive as relatively high stakes, that this can be something that can be helpful. How many of you in the room have gone through the college process with an older son or daughter? Okay, so probably about half. So the good news for those of you who didn't raise your hand is they're all looking really just fine. They're all here, they're smiling. So if you are a little stressed because this is your first time going through the process, know that it is a process that actually can have some fun in it. And I think ultimately will be one where your sons will be really excited about this next chapter of their lives. I will say that one of the nice things as well is that you've gone through a process perhaps somewhat similar with your sons in choosing Salisbury. And so you're already in a different place than some parents whose sons or daughters are in situations where they haven't had to elect a school and haven't had to kind of compare and think about relative benefits. So you already have a leg up as we start this. There are several different phases to the process, and so the first one really is when your sons are thinking about kind of the sort of the self-evaluation piece about what is it that I'm good at, what is it that I enjoy, what is it that I might want to be able to do academically, extracurricularly in college, and then where are the colleges that are going to match me. And I think that one of the things that you can be really helpful with there as you're talking with your sons about this is that you can, first of all, know that for those of you who have gone through it with an older child, that kids in the same family don't necessarily go through the process in the same way. Jess already alluded to the fact that sometimes sons and daughters do things differently, and even sons and sons do things differently, whether it's their timetable or the certainty of a first choice, or even a sense of knowing where to start. So don't assume that child number 2 will go through it the way child number 1 did. Do your very, very best, if you can, to not compare your sons with not only older siblings, but friends, kids, neighbors, cousins, whomever. And try to, if you can, sort of do that time travel back to being an adolescent. And part of it is, for the most part, these guys are feeling somewhat unsure of themselves, whether they'll ever admit it or not. And they always seem to feel when they're compared that they measure up short. So do the best you can to try to not compare. You may do it in your head, you may do it in conversations with one another, but not directly with your sons. Which leads me to another comment, which is that an error I think sometimes parents make is you might be having a conversation about somebody at work and their kid who applied early decision and just got into X college, and you're not talking about your son, you're not talking to your son. Your son might not even be in the same room, but he's within earshot. And one of you says, wow, that's great that so-and-so's daughter is going to X college. So then your son's going, okay, that is a good college. Or you might say, geez, she's going to such and such a college. I've never even heard of that place. So your son's thinking, okay, bad college. And you're thinking, I'm not even talking to you. I'm not talking about your process, but you're sending signals unintentionally. And so I do think that one of the things with parent traps is most of them are traps that very well-intentioned people fall into. So it's not a matter of having a bad attitude about the process, but it's about being careful to know how your comments may be perceived. You certainly should feel a partner with your son in this process. It's really, in my mind, a partnership of your son, you as parents, and then the college counselor. And as a partner in this, you should feel able and encouraged to make suggestions of schools that you think your son might want to consider. But you should have a reason for each suggestion, a reason you can articulate that is specific to your son. And because you should also expect that when your son says to you, gee, Mom and Dad, I think I'm interested in X college, he should have a reason. So you can hold him to that at the same time. But don't say, well, because this guy at work's daughter went there, she really loves him. Now, it might be that because you know somebody who has the same academic interests, is interested in vocal music, and so is your son. There might be some real good reasons, or something you've read. But again, be ready when you make suggestions to be able to give some specifics about why you think that's a good match. One of the things I think you want to be careful of is not putting too much weight on any one opinion. And it's a temptation, I think, because there are over 3,000 colleges in the United States alone, and we've got lots of kids going to college in Canada and the UK and places around the world. And so part of this is, well, geez, I want to narrow it. And so the temptation is, whatever you hear, good or bad, kind of sort the schools in your mind. But you do want to be careful. Somebody might think it's the best place ever, but it's not necessarily the best place for your son. You might read an article about somebody, maybe there's an op-ed or an editorial where someone's complaining about a particular college. Their colleges are in the news all the time. And again, that may be a legitimate criticism, but it might not have anything to do with the experience your son would have if he was there. And so it's one of those things to try to make sure you don't put too much emphasis on any one source. A couple of things that are combined here. I do think it's important if you as parents have strong biases or limits about where your son goes to college. I'll use the easiest example, geography. So if you are from Connecticut, for example, and you really want your son to go to a college that's within easy driving distance, perhaps he's one of the football players winning the championship, and you want to be able to see him play in his games, then you may not want him to go to school in California. And so if that's something that you feel strongly about, you need to say that. And you need to say it at the beginning of the process. You don't say it after your son gets excited about the school in California, applies, gets admitted, and then you say, oh, well, but we never had any intention of letting you go to school that far away. Not fair. Now, you might end up with not knowing right now that you have a bias, and as time goes on, having one coming up with an opinion that's new, and that's fair. But if you know now that there's a limit, if you feel strongly that your son attend a school with a particular religious affiliation, that's something to say, have conversations about. But along those lines as well, I think one of the traps that parents fall into, and it's very understandable, is the trap of, I really love my son to go to the college I went to. I really want him to go. That's a perfectly legitimate feeling for you to have, but it's not something to push on your son unless that college in this time, 2013, is well matched to his interests and his profile is well matched to their admissions profile. It's a very different time in college admissions. I was talking about news stories. BU was just in the paper earlier in the week for going over 52,000 applications for admission, which made my paltry 5,344 look like it was reasonable. And that actually I couldn't read all those files like Jessica was talking about. But that's a very different world. If any of your BU alums in the room, that's something to be enormously proud of, but oh my goodness, it's a very different world. And most of us, despite all of the remarkable issues with the economy and the prices of lots of colleges, most of us are seeing growth in our applicant pools. And so, again, you want to, where you, we hear this all the time from parents, well, he's so much smarter than I was in high school, he won't have any trouble getting in. Well, maybe he wouldn't have in that year, fill in the blank. But right now, it could be a different story. And again, it's perfectly legit to want your son or daughter to go to a school that you attended, but you want to give them that opportunity to decide. My advice to boys and girls all the time is, don't choose a college because your parent went there, and don't refuse to consider it because your parent went there. It ought to be a choice that you're able to make independently for the experience that you'll have now. A couple of other things as you get into the process, and as your son gets into the process of applying for admission. More is not necessarily better in terms of extracurricular activities. Absolutely, it is nice to not have the kind of completely one-dimensional extracurricular life that Jess sometimes described as sometimes what we'll read in an application, but it is also not the case that you should not leave here this weekend saying to your sons, oh my goodness, you're not doing enough extracurricular. You need to go get involved with some more things. In fact, he needs to be hitting the books, which is the most important thing, but also doing the things that he enjoys most, where there's an authenticity. There's nothing worse than being in an interview with a student and you ask them about what they're involved with, and they'll say, well, I'm very involved with the French club, and you'll say, so what does the French club do at your school? Not a lot. We sometimes eat French food. So that's not something that's going to be important. The other thing is summer after junior year of high school. In some communities, that's fraught with this sort of sense of what is my son or daughter going to do that is going to wildly impress the admissions committees at the schools where they apply. Our goal for your sons this summer is that they do something productive. Productive can be working on a landscaping crew. It can be baling hay with their uncle. It can be being a camp counselor. It can be doing a service project in Honduras. It can be working as a nanny. It can be taking care of younger brothers and sisters. It can be all kinds of things. It literally can be from the grocery store to the really cool internship in the investment bank. One is not better than the other. What is not good is when there is very little or nothing, and particularly when it's nothing that has them interacting with other people. You know, we just talked about the answer to the question about how did you spend the summers. I rested up. Doesn't bode well for the rigor of college. One of my other favorites is I took driver ed, which is a good thing, but I'm hoping that didn't take all summer full time. And so again, but don't leave here thinking, oh my goodness, you know, somebody in my neighborhood or somebody that I know, their son is going off and doing Where There Be Dragons in Thailand this summer, and my son really wants to be a lifeguard. That's okay. You know, being a lifeguard isn't always a job that's a lot of fun. And so and if it is fun, that's okay too, actually. I shouldn't even say it that way. It's fine for them to have fun, but we want them to be doing something, being interacting in some way. A couple of other things as your son does his applications. He does his applications. You do not do his applications. You, in some cases, may have an opportunity to do a parent reference. Some colleges allow that. But it is his work that he needs to represent. Just as his grades are in school, his test scores, he needs to do his application. And so one of the traps to avoid is you never use the plural pronoun when talking about the college application process. He is applying to college. We are not. And if you say to me, we are applying to Colby, I will say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that two of you in the family have on this side. It's your son. And again, that's sometimes a switch from the prep school time. So you've got to think about this. They're 17, 18, 19 years old. They're becoming adults. And so you want to, and again, this is all about parents, and I'm going to just call you out moms for a minute. Moms want to help sons get it done. Because you'd really like to kind of cross it off the to-do list. The very best way you can help your son know that you have confidence in his abilities is by letting him do his work himself. And it's an unintentional consequence, I think, sometimes when parents try to help too much. Jess talked about athletic recruitment, and I don't think that that's something that I need to talk about further than that. A couple of other things as you go into the kind of your son hearing about the admissions decisions. Remember, first of all, that you have no obligation to tell anyone outside of the college counselor and your college counselor's son and you where he's applying. So it is none of your neighbor's business. It's none of Great Aunt Susie's business. You can share that if your son chooses to share that. But it's really no one's business. And I think sometimes it's become this sort of thing where anybody meets a 17-year-old and they say, oh, so where are you applying to college? Why aren't you applying early decision anywhere? Have you thought about early action? So everybody's got an opinion. I sometimes say to kids, you know, just say I'm applying to all places that begin with S. You know, or I've decided I'm not going to go to college, I'm just going to get a backpack and travel the world. But and I think a perfectly polite answer is, you know, I haven't really decided yet, or, you know, kind of like my, you know, when I blow out the candles on my birthday cake, I'm kind of keeping it to myself, I don't want to jinx everything. But it's really nobody's business. And so I think that that's one of the ways you can help protect your son. When it's time for him to choose where he's going to enroll, don't assume that a college that's harder to get into is going to be a better fit for your son. I'm the one who worked at Vanderbilt, and I'll use one quick story here. I had a young woman who applied to transfer to Vanderbilt from another fine comprehensive university in the South, and she applied to transfer during the course of her first year. And in her essay, she said, you know, last year I got into Vanderbilt when I was a high school senior, and I got waitlisted at this school where I'm enrolled. And then I got admitted off the wait list. And I really wanted to go to Vanderbilt, but I thought I had to go to the other school because it was harder to get into because I got waitlisted, and then they admitted me from the wait list. And she said, and so all fall, I've just been sitting there going, man, I really wish I was at Vanderbilt. And she had made this decision, and this was her, not her mom and dad, I don't think, but again, you don't want to assume that because someplace is harder to get into, that somehow that's going to be a superior education or a superior experience for your son. In the end, I think that one of the things that's hardest for parents is to know how much to share your opinions with your kids. And one of the last bits of advice I would say is that in the end, your son does want to know what you think. He doesn't want you to be telling him every day what you think. But in the end, you know, especially when he's maybe, as Jess was describing, he's got 2 or 3 places, he likes them all, but you really can see him maybe at one more than another. He wants to know, so do let him know. Do share with him what you think, because he does want to know. Celebrate the successes and dismiss the defeats. The best thing you can do for your boys is when they don't gain admission to a college where they think they want to go, is to say to them, boy, that's really that college's loss. And just throw it away and move on to the ones with happy news. Because the bottom line is every single one of your boys will be in college the fall after Salisbury if they want to be. It's one of the beauties of higher education in the US, there's a place for everybody. And really there are lots of places for everybody. So those are some of the things to try to avoid. Thanks.
All right, Beth. So we go from things to avoid to things that maybe we can do to help support our sons through the process.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you.
Before I start our little finale here, I just wanted to mention something. So Terry is a tough act to follow. She hired both Jess and I. We all used to work at St. Lawrence together. So we were commenting on the ride over here that this feels more like spring break, not only because we all got to drive many hours south to tropical Salisbury, Connecticut, 20-degree temperatures, but also because we haven't seen each other in a while. And so we thank Bobby and everyone for organizing this, and for you for coming out to give us the chance to sneak away from applications and have a girls' night together. So thank you, Terry, for hiring both Jess and I. We're here. So I have just a few short points, mostly anecdotes, quite frankly, about just best practices in general. And to start off, what you're doing right now is one of the best practices. Being involved and getting excited about your son's college education, showing up to events like this, getting to know the counselors, getting to know us. Thank you for caring about this. We care about it, so it's great to see you all here tonight. So my first kind of strategic point is for your son to behave himself, and I'll explain that. We have a receptionist in the Dartmouth admissions office who is the eyes and ears of our entire place. And she keeps notes, just like we do when we meet students on the road. And she'll say, you know, boy, kid didn't hold door open for, you know, mom, or boy, kid was yelling at dad for not finding a parking spot in time to get the tour. And that is fair game. Anything is fair game. And so it's fascinating to me because a student will be on their best behavior when they're, you know, being important admissions counselors, but they'll slam the door in mom's face and forget it, or for not, you know, buying a great donut in the morning. And so a nice reminder to your son that all is fair in love and admissions and more. Same with, we get lots of questions about Facebook now and internet and all that nonsense. And I don't think, we're not checking, I'm sure you guys aren't checking either. But things are changing, it's becoming a more tech-savvy world. Just reminding your son of, you know, being a good gentleman in all facets of life, and the way he treats his parents in our lobbies, you know, on his online personality. That stuff does matter, and those are the little things that can help us get to know your son's personality a little bit more. So the admissions lobby receptionist is always convenient on most students. Secondly, just organize. And you guys are starting early. We have terrific counseling staff here that's starting your sons at an early time. We always, at Dartmouth, we always say it's very helpful for your sons to get a separate email address for all of their college application process materials. We had a quick story 2 years ago. One of the last decisions we made in the Dartmouth committee was a fabulous young man from Wisconsin who had straight A's, you know, best thing since sliced bread. But his email address was something to the effect of lazyguy@gmail.com. And we passed him around, and you know, we have a 9% admit rate right now, so everything matters. And your teachers can tell us that, you know, your son's the best thing since sliced bread, but if he has a silly email address, it's another piece of data we can use. And so, you know, first name, last name at Gmail, or, you know, I love to read at Gmail. That'd be really helpful because those little things matter. Which brings me to my next point, which is sweat the small stuff in the application. We talk a lot about essays. You guys hear a lot about essays, right? As everyone knows, they have to write a good essay. They have to spell check. They have to read it out loud to their friends and their parents and the voice and the topic. However, I like to say that something called the short answer, which is a little paragraph of 150 words before you get to the essay, can be just as important, if not more important than the essay. I'll tell you why. So many students know that they have to write a good essay, that we see 99% of the essays we see are really good, right? They're talking about something they care about, they're spell checking. But the short answers can be a grammatical nightmare because they're not thinking about it. They write two sloppy sentences. The question is, describe your most significant extracurricular activity. And so a lot of them will write two sloppy sentences about debate, and then they'll go on and write their big essay about how debate changed my life. And if we see two very different writing styles, we're going to know that the short answer is the more authentic writing style. And it's a real lost opportunity because when we're asking you, hey, in the short answer, describe your most significant extracurricular activity, that's a chance for you to really articulate why something on your laundry list of activities is really important to you. And it can be one more little gem of information that you can give to us in your own words. And so the short answer is super important, just as important as that essay, as are all of our supplemental. We all have different things we require. We require peer recommendation. Terry talked about parent recommendation. Some people ask for short answers. All that stuff matters. Otherwise, we wouldn't ask for it. And so the little stuff really does matter just as much as that big essay. And one of my colleagues likes to say, the application itself is actually a bunch of voices coming from other people. We hear from two teachers, we hear from your guidance counselors, we hear from your parents, we hear from your peers, we hear from the college board. All the students really have to do is fill out an extracurricular list, write an essay, and do a short answer. And so those little things, like the short answer, can really help in just any way they can make that help. Ask teachers, counselors, way in advance of those recommendations. We're all on the common application. We all require at least 2 teacher recommendations. We have a saying in admissions: the thicker the file, the thicker the cake. Oftentimes, when we get tons of extra recommendations, it just smells of desperation, right? We don't need our recommendation from your uncle's dentist who went to Dartmouth in the 70s but really doesn't know your son. Last year, it's very funny, last year we got recommendations from Michael J. Fox, Lance Armstrong, pre-everything. And yet, the best recommendation I've ever read in my career was actually... was actually from a janitor at a high school in New Jersey. And that janitor wrote this terrific letter about how this particular student was just a gentleman who stayed after, picked up litter in the hallway, and that meant so much more than the Bill Clinton letter, who really didn't know the internet well. But those people who really know your sons can really make that impression on us. Which brings me to one of my last points, is that in applications, we see a lot of repetition. If your son is a football player, and we see the essays about football, the short answers about football, the recommendations talk about football. The coach tells us that, you're a football recruit. Tell us anything else. And oftentimes, a recommendation from someone not in the football world can really be helpful. A recommendation from a scout leader or an employer or someone completely out of that realm can be really helpful. And I also think, I work specifically with athletics now at Dartmouth, and we tell students who are student-athlete recruits, please don't write about your sport, because again, we're going to know that you're a football recruit. We know that you're good at it. We know we're going to see all your awards on there. Write about anything else, and that just helps us have one more dimension, so we can go to the dean and say, hey, if little Johnny breaks his arm, here's something else that just shows a little bit more to his personality. And then 2 quick last things. Number 1, if you could help your sons with just not ever mass emailing college colleges to get information, and this requires a little bit of legwork, but as Terry and Jessica alluded, we all have different policies, we all have different pieces of our application, we all do things differently. Some of us have early decisions, some of us have interviews, so we'll hear all about this tomorrow. But it's important to reach out to each of us individually and find out what specific pieces we each do differently. We have something at Dartmouth we call the Ivy League mass email, where it will say admissions at Columbia, and admissions at Yale, and admissions at Cornell, and then there'll be one question. And that's really annoying. You really need to make the effort, take the time, talk to your admissions counselor. We're all human beings, so we're here to get to know your sons. And so have them shoot us an email, ask us a question. And the same goes for any teachers or researchers or coaches on campus. It's your son's responsibility to reach out to that lacrosse coach, to reach out to that biology professor. They're there, they're accessible, even at big places like BU. I mean, at any of these colleges now, there is an email directory where we give out email addresses for people who are willing to talk to your students, and so use those to your benefit. And then lastly, we meet a lot of people. We meet a lot of students from around the world. It is illegal for us to ask for our students to put a photo of themselves on an application. However, I find it very, very helpful if a student develops a relationship with one of us to remind us something specific about that student so that we remember who they are. And so, we come to a meeting at Salisbury, or little fall meetings, and we'll meet 7 young men, and we'll do our best to remember them, but when we walk out the door, we're going to Hotchkiss, and we're meeting 12 students, and we're going to Pomfret, we're meeting 20. And so it's nice to get an email follow-up that says, hey, Miss Munster, I was the student in the green Dartmouth shirt who asked the question about, science research. And then I can put it's helpful on our end because we're meeting so many people, and I think a lot of students automatically assume that we'll remember them. And that's not necessarily true unless you give us a reason to kind of grasp onto that. And so you don't have to give us your pictures, but it's helpful sometimes to jog our memories because we are meeting so many students. And that's it. So I think also, to enjoy this process, Terry had a great point about just, celebrating the college experience and celebrating the fact that we're all here tonight with sort of sons who are looking at further education. It's really exciting, and we're going to have a lot more information to give you tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. I know I got a lot from that. I don't know if there was a question or two, maybe we can kind of along these themes that maybe we've talked about that anyone might want to ask.
In terms of recommendations, is it, you say it's particular to the file, particular to the CV sometimes? I mean, is it better to get an alumni?
Great question. So we all will accept a few extra letters of recommendations. Fine. However, if someone's writing a recommendation and they don't know your son, they shouldn't be writing a recommendation. And so alums, great.
Let's see this built to be.
Exactly. It's just, and a lot of recommendations also will become very repetitive. So if there's a person who can give us a different angle, who has a different relationship, and who knows your son well, terrific.
Last fall, last Parents Weekend, I took a group of students to go visit some schools, and we were at Boston College, and we're sitting in the room, kind of having a very open conversation, and recommendations came, and very similar question was asked from one of the students, and the admissions counselor said, well, let me give you an example. We're here at Boston College, and we got a great letter of recommendation. You could tell it was kind of a form letter, and it was from Boomer Esiason. Maybe if it was Doug Flutie, we would have. But it just didn't. So to their point, when we talk about additional recommendations, the things that we stress, there has to be a knowledge of that student. Because there are we can get some great outside recommendations as long as there's a pre-existing relationship, and they know they can write to that student's strengths. And that's important.
You see nothing that we can smell when something's not that someone can try.
Right.
Yes, definitely.
some notes here.
Well, I just have a question. This is my first time doing this. And, I was wondering if there's a book or a website that you could recommend or guide. Because you go online and there's so much out there.
Well, yeah, and I was gonna say, I think it depends on the kind of thing you're looking for. I think that there are some books and websites that talk about the college process and give advice about different elements of the college process. And then there are books that are more what I would call college guidebooks. And those are books that are written with the express purpose of selling books, first of all. So there's very little that is neutral in them, I would say, and they're opinions that people are sharing. That doesn't mean that they don't have some value, but it's one of those things where you always want to kind of look for comparing and contrasting information and not use any single one resource as something that's sort of the guide. In terms of the process, there's nothing that comes to mind immediately, but I'll think about it a little bit, and by tomorrow there may be, there are a couple that might work. I don't know if you guys have any.
The College Board came out with a website 2 years ago to like educate something, and it was, I went to a presentation on it, I can't remember. I'll look this up. There's one that the College Board made specifically for students that was good. I'll let you know.
Have you been on our comments at all? There's some good resources there, and we're happy. We have some books in the college office that, can browse through. Even one that I've read actually a couple times, and they've come out with a couple of new editions, is 55 Colleges That'll Change Your Life, which is, it's a neat book. It talks about some smaller, schools that may not you may not recognize, or, and it's just a great, I think, book in terms of, one, there's some alternative schools out there, but also kind of philosophically, what things you might want to look for in a school. It's a really good book.
There's one of the missions, I think Wesleyan did, that were right from the director of the mission. I read that and it was amazing.
Well, Jacques Steinberg wrote it. He's a New York Times reporter. He sat in on the committee.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But again, and having worked at Wesleyan in admissions, and it's a fine book in a lot of ways, but if they weren't interesting, they wouldn't sell. I just need you to know that.
One of your,
No one's giving them away.
one of your great lines, you told me, we were talking about the U.S. News and World Report one time.
Well, what I always say about U.S. News and World Report, and I often joke, and your sons would look really glaze over if I said this, but I actually started in admissions before U.S. News and World Report started ranking colleges. So from the beginning of time, I've been doing this work. But it is, when you think about the colleges that they're ranking, many of which are 200 years old, 150 years old, 100 years old, if you think about it from at all a skeptic's perspective, the idea that there would be a change in order in a year's time, and every year there would be a change, is kind of absurd. But if they didn't change the order every year, they would publish a book, not an annual magazine, which is the lion's share of the revenue for that. The joke in our business is that's the swimsuit edition of U.S. News and World. But I mean, and what they do, and the way that the list does change every year, is they change the formula every single year.
Yeah.
So 1 year yield's included, and 1 year admit rate isn't, and 1 year this is included, and 1 year this isn't. And so it forces movement, which is, again, somewhat absurd. That doesn't mean that U.S. News and World Report can't be a useful guide used in the context of lots of things. But if you have a copy from 2 years ago, don't feel like you have to rush out and buy this year's, because it's really going to be relatively similar. But again, I don't want to sound like a cynic, because actually I love this work, and I'm actually pretty much an idealist. But you want to be good consumers in this process and not necessarily kind of lose your critical thinking skills as you get swept up in thinking, helping your sons with college.
Probably have time for one more question.